Allahu Akbar.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's such an honor and a blessing to be speaking with you today. First, I wanted to thank you guys for joining us. My name is Omar Bagnied. I'm involved with community outreach at Green Muslims, and today I'd like to speak about environmentalism from the prism of the Prophet Muhammad, and kind of some examples from his time, some examples from the time of early Islam. I first wanted to begin with what we already know. So in Islam, the Prophet Muhammad is deemed the best of Muslims, or Allah's best representative on earth. And what I hope to illustrate today is that one of the things that he exemplified is environmental stewardship. So when it came to dealing with our natural environment, he was an environmental steward, or as Emily referred to earlier, and what is referred to 9 times in the Qur'an, a Khalifa. Now, 3 of the Prophet's most important philosophies germane to nature were Khalifa, Tawheed, which is the unity of Allah and all His creation, and Amana, which Emily also touched on earlier, which is the trust bestowed upon man from Allah to care for creation. So the first examples I wanted to give pertain to equality, specifically the equality of man, animals, and land. Now Allah has given humans a unique trust as stewards of the earth, and we're reminded of the importance of animals and land in Surah Al-An'am, ayah 38, where it says, "No creature is there on earth, nor a bird flying with its wings, but they are nations like you." So reflect upon all the animals of the earth, even small collections of birds. Allah says specifically that they are just nations like you, that they are just nations like us, no different. And the Prophet spoke to the dignity of all living creatures. So to Allah belongs all things, including animals and land. And to desecrate them is an affront to Allah. The Prophet said that animals and land indeed do have rights. And the Prophet believed that animals, land, and water were not the possessions of mankind, but rather provisions from Allah to use in moderation when need exists. So in Surah Ghafir, ayah 57, it goes, "Surely the creations of the heavens and the earth is greater than the creations of man, but most people know not." We so easily become impressed with tall buildings, the cars that we build, other forms of man-made architecture. But there is nothing greater than what Allah has created in nature. Tremendously vast mountain ranges, lakes, ocean, rivers, seas, which make up, bodies of water make up 70% of the of the Earth's surface. Think about trees, greenery, which provide us the oxygen that we breathe, the plants that we harvest that give us the food that we eat. Allah says all of nature is far greater than what man has made by his own hands. Now, I want to look a little bit deeper into some specific aspects of nature. So the ways the Prophet approached planting, food, trees, and water. So the Prophet spoke of reward in planting and farming when he said, "There is none amongst the believers who plants a tree or sows a seed, and then a bird or a person or an animal eats thereof, but it is regarded as having given a charitable gift for which therein there is great recompense." Similarly, the Prophet said, "Whoever brings dead land to life," that is, cultivates wasteland, "for him is a great reward therein." And a third saying, by the Prophet, also similarly, he said, "When doomsday comes, if someone has a palm shoot in his hand, he should plant it." Now, when I read these 3 sayings of the Prophet, what I take away is a few lessons. First is that you care for land and cultivate it. When you do that, it benefits every single animal that resides or lives off that land, and every single human that resides or lives off that land. If you think about it, mashallah, it is all intertwined, it is all interdependent. And subhanallah, we as humans have a reciprocal relationship with animals and land. The second lesson is that subhanallah, Allah gives us the ability to bring dead land to life if we put in the work and we have the intention. And for that, there is great reward therein. And third, and perhaps most remarkably, is it shows the significance of nature independent from that of man's utility. So when we're instructed to, when doomsday comes, you are advised to finish caring for the land, it shows you that just because you're profiting from it doesn't mean that it exists independent upon you. I mean, the land is there, you plant it, and even if you're not to take from it, it's still God's creation and still to be respected. So now I want to look at how our resources, once they're extracted from the land, should be handled by people. One important practice of the Prophet Muhammad was that he always made a point to eat from the dish closest to him. Now, during the time of the Prophet, it was different from the times of today, of course. Currently, we live in a kind of a globalized world. But on a smaller scale, this was symbolically interpreted as engaging in local consumption. And furthermore, it was an expression of gratitude for what you are given and not taking from the proverbial plate of others. Now, I also want to touch on the intersection of animals and food and how it was approached by the Prophet. Now, the Prophet was not vegetarian. However, he did speak to the ethical treatment of animals that were to be slaughtered, stating that when the slaughtering was to be done, only sharp cutting instruments were to be used so that the process was quick and as humane as possible. And furthermore, that no other animal should be around when one was slaughtered. And also that the animal should not be around when the knives were sharpened. And he went so far as to say that violation of these was abominable. So he spoke in very strong terms about this. Now, when it came to water, the Prophet was inspired by the word of Allah transmitted through the angel Jibreel, which is now a verse in the Qur'an in Surah Al-Anbiya, ayah 30, which reads, "We made from water every living thing." And the Prophet spoke of water with relation to greed and excess on multiple occasions. One of his saying goes, "No one can refuse surplus water without sinning against Allah and against man." Furthermore, similarly, the Prophet warned his followers of consequences of withholding water against, when he said, "There are three types of people whom Allah will not look at on the day of judgment, nor will He purify them, and there shall be a severe punishment." And one of those people mentioned is a person who possessed a large amount of water on a path and withheld it from travelers. Now, a more specific example comes from the time of the Prophet when he spoke of a well that was privately owned by a citizen who was charging a high price for people to use it. The Prophet said, "For anyone who will purchase the Ruma well," which was the name of the well, "and use its water jointly with other Muslims, a wonderful place in the Garden of Eden will be prepared." So the Prophet's companion, Uthman, bought the well and made its use free for all people of Medina. Now, of course, we know that later Uthman became one of the caliphs of Islam, and he continued to maintain the well so that his constituents would always have access to water. And so this kind of speaks to how in the time of the Prophet, environmental stewardship was a practice of those who were held in high social regard. And this was directly tied to the teachings of the Prophet and the emulation of his example. Now, the final aspect I wanted to speak on is cleanliness. So, obviously, we live in a busy world. We sometimes, think that cleanliness is kind of a secondary priority in our lives. And it shows and it's manifested itself in some ways, including increasingly polluted environments, the disintegration of our ozone layer, strange climate occurrences, unfortunately worsening air and water quality, things like that. However, it is important to remember that cleanliness is an essential aspect of our deen. And the Prophet spoke to how we should do our part to preserve the purity and cleanliness of our environment, both for our communities and for generations forward. And one saying of the Prophet is very simple. He said, cleanliness is half of faith. And he said this is related to an expression of faith, which is our prayer. And the Prophet said, wherever you may be at the time of prayer, you may pray. For all the earth is a mosque. And so if all the world is a place of worship, and places of worship are sacred and meant to be kept clean and dignified, then naturally we must keep our earth clean. A further saying of the Prophet related to the soil of the earth, and he said, the earth has been created for me as a mosque and as a means of purification. And of course, the value of soil is well known, as you can use soil instead of water when you do wudu, when water is unavailable. So it's also acknowledged that although the earth was subservient to man, it should not be overexploited or abused. And actually, the Prophet was a pioneer when it came to the modern day concept of preserved areas of land. What today are called reserves or preserves, that you sometimes find in our national parks, or specifically maybe Alaska as well. The Prophet used to designate special areas where water, wildlife, and forestry use would either be restricted, and he called those harams, or left alone altogether. And he called those hemas. And just imagine that in the time of the Prophet, where he lives in a vast desert, and there aren't many resources anyway. So I think it's important that we reflect on that. Even if we reflect on the modern day treatment of land in the Muslim world. And so finally, I want to close with kind of a optimistic saying of the Prophet, and it relates to the idea of humans being accountable for the well-being of an incredibly beautiful planet that we live in. And the Prophet said, the world is beautiful and verdant, and verily Allah, be He exalted, has made you His stewards in it. And He sees how you acquit yourselves. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.